Hello, my most amazing artists. Today we're going to learn a little bit about the artist Berthe Morisot, who was born in Bourges, France in January 14th, 1841. She was very much supported by her family and had the best art education, and she would often frequent the Louvre in Paris, copying paintings created by master artists. She developed a love for landscape, portraits, and what we're going to be talking about today, which is still life painting. When she got a little bit older, she was often critical of her own work and was not allowed in many of the places her male friends were allowed. This discrimination did not stop her drive to become an artist. For more than 3 decades, she created paintings that have helped guide the direction of French art. She married Eugene Manet, the brother of Edouard Manet, and had one daughter named Julie. And Julie was the subject of many of her mother's works and provided the inspiration for her paintings documenting women's lives. And today we're going to be making rose bottlescapes with inspiration from artist Berthe Morisot. So here we have some examples of some still life pictures as well as a real rose to provide some inspiration. So here's a picture and a little bit of information. Again, we talked about how she was kind of a pioneer for women impressionist artists. And because of her pioneering, she created an art that brought out some of the feminist qualities of the time. So you'll see a lot of her pictures are flowers, and we're going to be taking a close look at those today, in particular roses. So I wanted you to pay close attention to these awesome brushstrokes. You can see how as an impressionist, she's giving the hint of shapes within and a lot of use of light and white. So that is what we're going to attempt to achieve today as well. So with all of that said, let's get started and talking about what we're going to need for art supplies. So today we're going to need paper. I'm going to be using a blue crayon to do some of my outlining and sketches. And I'm going to be using watercolor paint, or if you have acrylic craft paint, that's even better, or any art material that you have available. I also like to add a little bit of chalk, you'll see in my finished piece, but that's optional, of course. And we're going to be kind of inspired by a little bit of what we've seen so far for pictures, as well as creating vessels. So let's talk about that for a minute. And create a vase or a vase and vessels can be anything really. I'm sure you've seen flowers, ranging in buckets to bottles to canning jars and the like. So you can see there's all sorts of different shapes that vessels can be made into. And let's just talk a little bit about some of the basic shapes. So this here we have an oval at the top, kind of like we did the soup cans, an oval at the bottom, and then you have two kind of vertical lines on the side. And then there's something in the center, that's the water line, that gives the impression of a 3D image. And so we're going to use those kinds of shapes again, small oval, a little bit bigger oval, and then finally a bigger oval, and then you just kind of connect them all to create a single bud vase. Or of course, there are rounded vases here, and then you can see there's a oval shape in the center, oval at the bottom, and a really small skinny oval at the top. Or one that we're going to create today, which is a series of these tall and skinny bottles. So these are just created. We're going to talk a little bit more about that with some, again, simple shapes, rainbow shapes, an oval, an oval, an oval, and then some vertical lines connecting the two. So you can see that they really can come in a variety of shapes that are not, again, held fast. You can create your own shapes to create your display. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about shadow and light, and you can see where I have some shadows on the table, shadows within the vase, and then light, because when light shines through something that's clear, it will often bounce off certain areas, creating a little bit of a lighter reflection. So you can see here the table and then the shadow that was underneath. So let's get started, shall we? I have a piece of paper here. Mine has some watermarks on it from a previous lesson, and that's okay. You can easily start with a plain piece of paper. What we're going to do is just create a series of bottles. So I like to have bottles arranged in a way where you have some maybe going off the page at the bottom. Those are your biggest at the closest, the forefront. And then probably about to your halfway line. Right here is where you want your bottle images to kind of stop. So let's get started and talk about what those bottle shapes are going to look like. So again, you can use your blue crayon, your blue chalk, whatever you have available. And we're just going to create a rainbow shape to start with, a rainbow shape. And then I'm going to make an oval, skinny oval, and another really skinny oval right here at the top. And then about to where the vase is going to end up, another skinny oval at the bottom. And now we're just going to connect all of these lines. So I'm going to start by just connecting the sides. And then also a skinny oval I forgot about right here at the top. And I'm going to connect these as well. So you can kind of see I've created a bottle shape. So that's one bottle. But remember, we're creating an entire series. So each of these is its own little still life in and of itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and these bottles certainly don't have to match. So I'm going to bring some lower, leave some higher. And again, start with maybe a rainbow down here this time, that little oval, another little oval. So ovals, there's another oval, and then either towards the bottom, or this one might be a good one to just run off the edge of the page. So I'm just going to kind of come all the way down with that one and the top. There we go. So there's two bottles. I'm going to keep on going, and I'm going to try to, again, think to myself, in an arrangement, I might have more than one in this particular space. I'm going to fill in this one first. So I'm going to make my rainbow about here, oval, oval, little oval there, and then maybe make my oval shape here, connect them, and then know that there might actually be one that's kind of overlapping. You can also overlap your bottles, which means that you would have a rainbow, but it wouldn't be the whole entire shape, maybe just part. And again, this one might not be quite as long, or if it is, it's hidden behind a bottle. You can kind of create your own little scenario with that. All right, so here's another bottle here hiding there. Oh, this one looks like a bottle shape already. So I'm going to kind of go with that. Here's where the rainbow would be. Another little oval here. And then this one, I think I also want to, since it's such a large bottle, keep it maybe running right off the edge of this paper. And you can see I have another space up here. Maybe make my rainbow here. So again, just a variety of shapes and sizes, and you can always go back and add in if you are feeling like you need more. Maybe, for example, this is kind of a spot that needs another bottle. So I might think about putting maybe one that's kind of behind the others again. In here, that looks pretty good. All right. Once you have your bottle shapes established, again, using whatever you're sketching with, now's the time you can think about your stems. So I'm just going to switch to a different piece of chalk, but I just want you to concentrate on how stems look when they're in a jar. They're kind of like a paintbrush, right? So you can see how this paintbrush is leaning on the edge of the jar. Very few flowers stand straight up without leaning. So when you're creating your flower stems, you want to kind of make sure that they are leaning on, giving a little realistic flair here, to one side. You can tell the difference of a flower that looks like it's leaning versus one that's straighter up. So you want to make sure you give it a realistic touch here by creating some lines where you would have, you could even put more than one in a vase, of course. And then here as well. So now I've got my vases, I've got my stems. So now I'm kind of working backwards from what we're creating, which is the flower. So I'm saving that part for the end because I really want to give it the most impressionistic like feel, which I'm going to use my paint for. So here I just have some watercolor paints because they dry quickly. And you can also use those, or if you have acrylic paints, those will also work just as well. So in order to create some roses, remember, we're just going to be offering the impression, just like Berthe Morisot did in her impression back in France. So we're just going to take and start with, I guess, some sort of a neutral, maybe a little darker color. I'm going to use a little bit of gray. And I'm just going to add where I think these flowers might be just a little smudge of gray. And you can even add some more than you think you might need, because you, as you see, you never know where your flowers are going to end up. And the more you can add into your design, the more variety, the better your art will look. Okay, so I have my gray smudges, as you will have them, and I'm just going to give those a second to dry, because I really want to make sure that they're not going to bleed into my flowers. If they do, no big deal, but I'm just going to give those a second and start thinking about creating my rose shape. Now, many of you might be familiar with creating roses simply by winding like a cinnamon bun type circle. But what we're going to try and achieve today are roses that have just a hint of what is to come, kind of those leaves that are a little bit more like wrapped around the center. So when you do, you're wrapping around the center and you're just giving the impression. So that's what we're going to look to do. And you can see here, not just with red, but with other, here's some impressions. So we're going to kind of try to use that effect as well. All right, I've given them a second or two to dry. So now I'm going to come in with whatever color schemes you want to use. Sometimes I like to even mix colors. So starting with your lighter colors first, if you're going to mix them, I'm just going to come in and just add around just little lines. You can even see nothing that even resembles a rose at this point. And just kind of dance my yellow around just to create a little bit of, try to use less water because I am going to come back in really quickly with my next color. So again, you could go right ahead and add your rose. If you're making pink, you can come back in and they're going to kind of mix and make their own little color as it is. But you can see, just going to add little hints around. And maybe over here, some more. Looks like this guy doesn't have a stem. I'm going to have to add that in there. We'll worry about some of those stems after. Okay, and I'm going to add just dabs of paint. So I'm not really even forming anything in particular. Dabs of paint. And they kind of look like they are like big letter U kind of hugging that center with just a little spot around the other edge to indicate there are flowers that kind of petals that go all the way around, but you might not necessarily. The bigger ones tend to be in the center and around the front that you see. And I'm just going to keep on mixing and painting until I have a good solid row of flower petals. So I did lots of centers, which the more centers you do, the more petals you make. The more fun it will look, but just add some of that in together. Can even add some of this. You can see my colors are kind of mixing together a little. That's okay. A little variety in there. In fact, I could go back in and even add some other hues. Again, it's best to keep warm colors together and cool colors together. Let's see, make those little cups a little bigger. There we go. So I have my centers, I have my flower impressions, as it would be. And now you can decide if you want to give your bases a little bit of a color. So you can tell my paper already had a bit of a tad of just a touch, and you can see when it dries, it gives it that nice kind of watery look again. I'm just going to add a little bit of light blue in there. It's mixing with my chalk a little, and that's okay. Just going to come around. That's why crayons, sometimes they're better. They have resist. Just going to paint in those bases ever so slightly and lightly. And now we're going to give them kind of they look like they're all kind of floating in air right now. So a bit of a background. I'm just going to use a neutral color like gray and just come in around my vases here and try to give them a little bit more of a background. And you can see watercolors dry quickly, which is great. It gives a kind of nice light, delicate touch, and it dries quick. So then we can go back in with some other details. I might even take this gray a little darker at the bottom and then kind of have it get a little lighter as we go towards the top. And if you're feeling like you can just drag it up a little bit without even getting more paint on the brush, even better. It creates a nice light background. Don't forget the top as well. Just kind of lightly adding some shading to the sky and the background, so it just gives it a little bit more of a pop and a finished petite look. All right, here we go. So now that we have all of those beautiful flowers, we let them dry to the best of our ability here, because it's going to take a few minutes, of course. And then you're going to want to think about adding in some of those chalked details that I was talking about, or you could also use crayons or oil pastels. Again, waiting for this to dry, then it will allow you the opportunity to come back in and add some of those highlights and add some of those little marks of depth. So you can see, just using my chalk, I'm just going to come in here, and chalk does play well with water, so that's why I'm a little bit better than crayon does. So I'm just going to fill in, making kind of like little wiggly shapes all around. Nothing that looks too fancy. You can even change and add some darker leaves. There you can see, just kind of adding some real vague highlights or shadows in the leaves, not really in those petals. Not really worrying if it is exactly a petal shape. It's more of like an impression, the impression of it. So we're just kind of going around. You can even add a little bit of depth now in the center. Again, those petals, and you don't want to go all the way around your flower the whole way, because it will kind of make it look a little bit cartoon-like. We kind of want to keep it with just impressions. So notice I'm not outlining. I'm just taking my petals and giving them a little bit more by, looks like little birds, I guess, flying around. Just those little M shapes and wiggles, and trying not to overdo all of those outlines. Okay, so now that I have a variety of chalk, I can go back again, adding some depth with your chalk or your crayons with your water lines. You can add a little bit in your bases. Mine are pretty well outlined, but I'm just gonna add a little bit maybe in the water department here now that it's a little bit dry. And just see, I'm just adding some highlights, being really kind of just, I like this kind of quick in, out, and then thinking about putting some shadows and some highlights. So if you're making some shadows, usually you would pick a side and kind of just add a little depth on one side or the other. You can kind of create whichever. I kind of just like to stick some in between here and there. And you can also add some highlights. So again, using white once it's dry, not as visible, but you can still come in and even just add a little on the opposite side, maybe where the water line is, where it kind of reflects a little bit, maybe a little bit at the top. And you have even some on your flowers if you think you need it in there as well. You can add a little bit maybe in those centers. Very light-handed. I might use a little tiny bit of black. Black is a really potent. So I'm just gonna add a little here and there just for some energy. There we go. Oh, and those kind of got lost in there. So I might just add a little bit. And now we have our still life of Bottlescapes, and we have multiple, and it gives it a kind of fresh energy. So I hope you enjoyed learning about Berthe Morisot and creating your own bottlescape. All right, thank you. And we'll see you guys again next time. Keep on creating.